Right. So, I was wondering your position on yeah, Ukraine. I was wondering, why do you think that the Russian invasion was justified? Because I remember you were saying like, oh, yeah, Russia's not going to invade. You know, you when you debated like Destiny, you kind of you made some
Nope.
spurious points.
Go back.
Uh,
Come on. Go back to my Twitch streams. And I said this. I said, the U.S. intel reports are bullshit, because they were. Russia is not planning on invading. Given Ukrainian troop movements and intel from the Russians of increased escalation in the Donbass, the Russians are running out of options, because they were in talks for months trying to talk to the West about Donbass. Minsk 1 and 2 failed. Minsk completely failed. Ukraine had no intention to fulfill Minsk. So Russia's cornered. Hold on. We're in February, mid-February. And Ukraine is continuing to escalate and threaten in the Donbass, violating the peace there. Russia is committed to a solution and is not going to allow a large-scale military operation by the Ukrainian military to retake the Donbass. Russia will not allow that. And that's why Russia tried to pursue for a decade Minsk. So the U.S. kept saying Russia's going to invade Ukraine, Russia's going to invade Ukraine, because they were collaborating with the Ukrainian government and Ukrainian intelligence, and U.S. intelligence, I mean, because they were themselves planning a large-scale operation in the Donbass. So what does Russia do? Russia says, all right, you know what? This is our final fucking, red line. We have no choice. We are going to recognize the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics. And we're going to form a mutual pact and treaty for self-defense to protect them. All this rapidly happens in the span of half a week. A few days later, the Ukrainian military is still encroaching upon the Donbass. And here's what I said. I said, if the Russians feel like, even after recognizing the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics, that the Ukrainian military is still going to march on Donbass to retake it, Russia quite possibly will actually intervene. And they did. My prediction came true. So people get lost in the details because the U.S. kept saying Russia's going to invade Ukraine for a month. Russia did invade Ukraine, but not for the reason the U.S. was saying. The U.S. was saying this to justify, to keep Russia at bay, basically, to tell them, hey, Ukraine is going to go take back the Donbass and you're not going to do shit about it. It's almost like someone has a knife and they want to go stab your little sister. So before they go and stab your little sister, they go, oh my God, Patton has a baseball bat and he's going to beat my head in. He's going to beat my head in. And it's like, no, you don't have the intention of doing that unless you have to protect your little sister. The person who had the bad intention first was the Ukrainian government, planning large-scale military operation in the Donbass. Everything Russia did, from recognizing the Lugansk and Donetsk People's Republics to actually stepping in and invading Ukraine, was to stop that from happening and draw a red line.
Where's the evidence?
The evidence has to do with the exact circumstances of the increased escalation in the Donbass leading up to Russia's recognition of the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not exactly
because
sure
I was reporting on it in real time. At the same time the U.S. was saying Russia's going to invade, Russia's going to Ukraine, I was also reporting on how Ukrainian military is escalating the violence in the Donbass after Minsk 1 and Minsk 2, and Russia has little patience left for that.
Well, I know. Well, Russia also violated those
How?
Those agreements.
How did they?
I know
how I know you're wrong? Because Ukraine didn't even implement any versions of the Minsk agreements, and they openly said they had no intention of doing that because they only signed the agreements because they were at gunpoint as France and Germany watched. In quotes from them.
Well, I mean, I don't think. I think they knew that probably Russia had further intentions of invading Ukraine. I mean, that was kind of that was like that was the kind of that was the whole thing. That was the intention kind of all along.
I know. Listen, I know the communists on the ground in the Donbass. I've talked to them about this. Here's what they told me. It's been 10 years, by the way. They said.
Also, I heard they banned labor unions in the Donbass. Well, I'm not 100% sure about that.
It's a bunch of nonsense. All right. I'm going to tell you what actually happened. They were expecting Russia to come and take the Donbass after Maidan. They didn't want Maidan. They said, Mother Russia's going to come, protect us and absorb us, and we're going to join Mother Russia. And this is what they thought in the immediate aftermath of Maidan after Crimea in 2014. And you want to know what happened? Russia had no intention of doing that. So people in the Donbass felt very betrayed by Russia for that reason. And they decided they were going to have to fight themselves. Russia had so much internal popular political pressure. People make it seem like Putin's not a popular president. He is. Just because urban young people in Moscow don't like Putin doesn't account for the rest of Russia that loves him. Anyway.
And boomers like him.
Exactly. So there's tremendous grassroots pressure in Russia about what's going on in Donbass. Tremendous civil war and violence. So Putin, almost that he's pressured from below. It's not because he wants to bring back the Soviet Union. He's a moderate. He's a centrist. But he has this grassroots pressure where he has to stop this conflict. It's making him look bad and making him look weak too, by the way. So that was Minsk. They brought the Europeans to the table, France and Germany. They said, okay, we're going to find a way to stop this bloodshed and stop this civil war, period. But Ukraine doesn't agree with that. Why? Because from the Ukrainian perspective, listen, Zelensky ran for presidency. I was here for this whole thing. I wasn't in Ukraine, but I was like analyzing and watching this while it was happening. And I remember he ran on a platform for peace in the Donbass, right? And that was popular in Ukraine. But it wasn't popular among the armed combatants in eastern Ukraine who were fighting the Russian-speaking population. And yeah, it's that A word, Azov and co. So it's Azov and co, Azov and friends. Those are the people in Ukraine the government had no control of, who had guns, who were being trained by Western special military forces, who were basically the strong arm of the entire Ukrainian state, the true Ukrainian military proper. I mean, the other Ukrainian military was very outdated, extremely inexperienced, but the guys actually fighting in the Donbass, they were the power, they had the guns. So despite Zelensky's platform for peace, the conflict continued. The Ukrainian government, even if it wanted to, couldn't pursue Minsk. It couldn't pursue Minsk because all of these armed militias that are fighting on behalf of Ukraine could not be disarmed by the government. The government had no sovereignty over these people. Minsk was impossible because, you know what? These armed militias were motivated by an extremist ideology which said every inch of Ukrainian soil will be under Ukraine's control. Not only are we going to go into Donbass, show all these people who's in charge, and take all of it, we're also going to go recapture Crimea. And never has the Ukrainian military rescinded upon that ambition.
Yeah, legally, like, those areas are Ukraine.
Okay. But we're understanding the source of the military conflict. At no point did Ukraine want peace in the Donbass. Even you can admit that. They didn't want peace in the Donbass. They wanted to take it. Why? Because they saw the separatists as illegitimate. So they wanted to take the Donbass. The problem is that causes bloodshed because the people in the Donbass don't want to be part of Ukraine because the president they elected got overthrown unconstitutionally. That is bloodshed. Russia cannot afford to tolerate that bloodshed.
Russia is the one who's like coming in here with like unmarked troops and like, you know, they basically started all.
Even
all
if there were unmarked
right?
troops, they are a negligible portion of the actual will of the people in the Donbass, who overwhelmingly, by the way, voted for Yanukovych, who got deposed. They saw their will and their sovereignty violated in an unconstitutional coup, so they want out. Any country that would be the case, they wanted out. And they're Russian speakers, and historically they were always part of Russia.
So I think maybe if they want out, like, you know, there's a right way to do it, but that doesn't give Russia the right to just like come in and say, okay, yeah, we're taking off a part of your country, we're also taking off Crimea.
No. Okay, hold on.
Like, and they have this bogus.
Before we talk about Crimea, you have to understand. Russia did want another way to resolve it. That's why they brought France and Germany to the table. France and Germany aren't sitting here being like, yeah, Russia, roll in the tanks. Russia knew France and Germany would try to be reasonable here, especially because they rely on Russian gas. But France and Germany are going to be like, okay, let's just have a ceasefire. You disagree about the boundaries, but let's allow for a de facto and de jure kind of separation. Like de facto, obviously Ukraine's not running the Donbass, but you can claim de jure that you actually do, right? And you have to leave it at that or there's going to be bloodshed. So it's that de facto de jure gray space that was Minsk was trying to push. And I'm trying to tell you that didn't satisfy what these militias in the eastern part of Ukraine, the Azov and co., they were not satisfied with that. They wanted de facto and de jure control of eastern Ukraine, which means they were not committed to any kind of peace or of stopping the bloodshed.
How is it a bad thing that you want to like take your country back? That some countries.
Oh, listen. You can argue about whether it's right or wrong, but just to be clear, the source of the bloodshed was coming from the Azov militants who want to go and fight these people who don't want to be part of Ukraine. Yes or no?
I think they're the ones that started. I know they were heavily involved in 2014.
Yeah, so the answer is yes. The answer is yes.
I don't think they didn't start the violence. It was Russia that moved. They moved in and they started it.
No. People living in Donbass overwhelmingly voted for Yanukovych, who was overthrown unconstitutionally. They wanted out. They wanted out, and it was an indigenous grassroots thing in Donbass. So much so, they wanted Russia to come in. Russia would not oblige them. That's what they wanted. Russia wouldn't come to save them. That's why they had to form their own militias and shit.
Yeah,
so,
I would have to look into the specifics.
But look into it, and also I recommend you talk to people who live there because they'll tell you. So this is what happens. Ukraine is not committed to peace. Russia, for obvious reasons, cannot afford. The Russian government cannot politically afford for the violence in the Donbass to continue. For its own reasons. It can't allow that to continue. So it tried to sue for peace for 10 years, and then things started to really heat up in late 2021 and early 2022 when Russia kept telling NATO and America the following. We know your intelligence services are involved in Ukraine to escalate the violence in the Donbass, and we think the reason you're doing this is because you want to push for NATO partnership for Ukraine. And Russia said, we can't allow that. And then what did the U.S. say? They said, well, we're not going to write it off the table. And the Ukrainian government didn't write it off the table either.
So, yeah.
So now Russia's now understanding the situation, and they're saying, okay, they want to come, increase violence in the Donbass, attack our people, bloodshed, and then they want NATO, and then what else are they going to want? Then they're going to come into our borders, and disputed borders, whatever, and that's the next step. And, you think about it, and it's like, the U.S. is so fucking paranoid about a spy balloon from China, supposedly, right? A balloon in the sky. And we say, oh, we got a bridge, go to war. Imagine right at your doorstep, and then there's this violence, and it's coming at you, and it's right on your fucking border. If you think American politicians over-exaggerate shit, imagine you're in Russia. That's an immediate, clear, and present danger, period. And that's a red line that any reasonable person would be able to respect. So
so I think the point of view you're coming at. I think I think Russia is just more concerned with they obviously they don't want Ukraine to join it. I think they're more concerned about like extending their sphere of influence because also just the fact that they don't like.
I'm going to tell you what that means concretely.
Ukraine historically.
No, let me tell you something.
Their sphere of influence. So since they wanted to,
listen.
Supposedly protect their borders.
No, Russian alternative political parties, let's call them that. The Communist Party, these nationalist ones, the ones in the Donbass, they want that. They want a big Mother Russia and a big empire, whatever. But the status quo in Russia just wants stability. They don't want to extend their sphere of influence. Well, now they might, but before they didn't, because that's not the logic of how that Russian status quo operated. It operated as an exporting country.
Well, actually, no, I really don't think that's true. Because on Russian media, they talk a lot about how like we want to go into Poland, we want to go into Germany, and when
that's nothing. That's all talk. Let me tell you something.
They're very they're like,
listen. That corresponds to an extremely impotent reality, which is this: Russia was just a gas exporting economy. All revenues derived from gas went to the energy sector at the expense of the rest of the economy. There was no economic ambitions of influence in Ukraine whatsoever for Russia. There's none anywhere else, actually.
Why are they stealing the grain? Why are they're stealing the grain and they're sending it to Syria?
Listen, Russia doesn't. But that's not why. You want to be cynical? Let's be cynical. Whatever grain they're exporting to Syria, you do the cost sheet, cost and loss. That's not why they went into Ukraine. They lost way more economically than whatever they're getting from exporting grain to Syria. Okay, so that's not why they did it. Maybe they're doing it, maybe they're not. I don't know. I haven't looked at it.
They want some of the gas. I think it's more.
What are they getting? What gas? What gas? Russia is opening up the Power of Siberia pipeline. A whole bulk of gas reserves getting revealed in Siberia. What do they want from Ukraine? Why do they need Ukraine's gas? They don't.
Ukraine has some gas too, but I think it's more about like their sphere of. They don't want. Okay, you
tell me what sphere of influence means. What does that mean? Like economically, whatever. Concrete terms. What does it mean? Because let me tell you the truth. This is Ukraine and Russia.
Okay, you want me? Okay, so you ask me a question and you keep talking. You have to stop interrupting. A sphere of influence is an area of which a country has like political, economic, and military like control.
So concretely, what does that look like?
Soft or hard power.
Okay. Tell me what that looks like concretely.
Well, yeah, it was when the Soviet Union was first formed, when they were invading like all those other countries, or it's when
that's a totally different situation. I'm talking about right now.
This is a better example. It's when in the 1950s, like
no, stop. I'm not talking. We're not talking about the 1950s that describes contemporary Russia. There is nothing about the 1950s. No. Let me explain something to you. The 1950s. There is nothing about the 1950s that the Soviet Union did that's going to explain anything about the logic of the current Russian economy and status quo. Objectively speaking, Russia's economic sector was the energy industry at the expense of all the other sectors. The source of nostalgia and longing for a great Russian empire or the return of the Soviet Union doesn't come from the government or the ruling class. It comes from who? The pensioners. It comes from all of the people living in Russia and eastern Ukraine shut up for a second. Whose infrastructure, whose everything, whose transportation, whose education, whatever, it all comes from the Soviet era, and it hasn't been updated since like the 80s or the 70s, all right? So that's where that connection comes from. It comes from the Russian language. It comes from memory. It comes from these kinds of things. But in terms of the actual Russian ruling class and the Russian government, there's nothing internal to that carries the seed of any expansion of the sphere of influence. It's just the logic of make money from the energy industry, pour it back into the energy industry, and then into nothing else. The only way we could be talking about an expansion of Russian influence, as you're calling it, is if there's some kind of new foundation of the Russian economy where they're going to be pouring a bunch of it into renewal of that Soviet infrastructure and manufacturing and coal mining and all these jobs that they used to have in the Donbass and elsewhere, and that they're going to form this grand kind of communist, socialist style planning economy where they need resources from here and here and central. That's not what happened, right? What happened is there's a lot of talk in Russia about the great Russian Empire and stuff, but that's not based in the actual political economy and economic reality of Russia. It's an ideology of nostalgia that is not justified by the logic of the Russian status quo.
Well, this nostalgia kind of justifies them going into Ukraine.
No.
They built a Soviet empire, as Putin basically said. The fall of the Soviet Union was the greatest catastrophe of the 20th century. So.
No, Putin said. He said, this is his words, not mine, because I disagree with him. Anyone who doesn't miss the Soviet Union has no heart, but anyone who wants it back has no brain. He didn't want to bring it back. Putin is a centrist and a moderate in Russian context. Okay, he wants stability and maintain the status quo. The people who want expansion are the communists and the nationalists, people who are not in power but have influence because of how popular they are. Now, you're not going to want to hear this, but it's the truth. You're not going to want to hear it, though. Russia is what you call a managed democracy. It's not a dictatorship. There are different political factions and interests that represent different parts of the Russian population, all of whose interests have to be weighed in some way. It's not a unilateral dictatorship of Putin.
I've heard of electoral autocracy. I heard somebody in Russia say that.
Okay.
Or sorry, informational autocracy. So they still depend on the will of people in some way.
So Putin is the moderate there. He's the centrist within that scheme. He doesn't want to do this ambitious revival of the Soviet Union. But politically speaking, Putin at home is looking very weak, very bad, when he's allowing what's going on in the Donbass to happen. Putin represents the status quo of just the energy industry, whatever. And then look what's happening. The communists, the right wing, the Zhirinovsky guys, whatever. Let me tell you something. Zhirinovsky, his party, the Liberal Democratic Party, don't be fooled by the name. They, in the Russian Far East, I forget the exact name of the city, there were protests, big protests and uprisings. Pensioners are always up in arms, because why? Because the United Russia wants to raise the pension age or cut pensions or do something like this. And it's like Putin's approval rating is so low at this point, and now...
Well, I don't think that's true. It's always been pretty high, I think.
No. In late 2021, it was not high. But that's not because Navalny was popular. It's because that approval rating gives more power to the, let's call them the Russian nationalists, whether they're communists or they're right-wingers or they're monarchists, whatever. Suddenly, people want to vote for them instead of Putin if they feel like Putin is not representing Russia and the will of Russia. So this is not a good...
His approval was 65%. That's far more than any leader in the West is going to get.
What was the date of that?
December 2021 from Statistica. This is when things started to heat up. I guess.
Yeah, that's when they started to heat up. I promise you, I remember 2021. Yeah, see, in May 2020, it dropped to a historic low, and it wasn't doing well.
Probably from COVID, I guess. Because, I think Russia got hit pretty bad from COVID.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly correct. Now that what's going on in Donbass is happening, it's like the situation is politically not acceptable to the Russian status quo. Like, they had no choice but to act. Or else, they risk an internal political crisis and crisis of legitimacy.
I mean, I haven't looked into it enough, but I haven't seen the evidence that they actually they really care about what's going on in the Donbass. I think
maybe Putin doesn't, maybe he does. I can't speak for him personally, but the Russian communists, who are the second largest party, they were the ones who drafted the legislation years back to recognize the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republic, and they've always been pressuring the government and telling the government, we need to act, we need to act, we need to act. Why? The Communist Party represents a huge portion of the Russian boomers and an emerging youth, if you can believe it, who are nostalgic for the Soviet Union. And that's the lobby they represent, all the people who want the Soviet Union back. That's the Communist Party, right? They're the ones who want to go into the Donbass. It's not Putin. It's not the status quo. It's the anti-establishment. There's two kinds of anti-establishment. There's the sovereign anti-establishment, which is like, we're against the current establishment because it's too liberal and we want to be more hardcore. And then there's the fake, I call the globalist, quote-unquote anti-establishment, which says, we want to basically gut Russia's sovereignty and allow global institutions to be let loose and run free. And those are the democracy activists or whatever, like Navalny and all that kind of stuff. They're not very popular in Russia. I mean, you might believe they're a political force in Russia. I know a lot of Westerners believe they're a big political force in Russia. They're non-existent in Russian politics. To be able to get to that point, you have to be operating outside the system. Because remember, Russia's a managed democracy.
I'm not surprised because there's no independent media allowed.
Yeah, sure.
It's not shut down, and he's gone arrested and fucking poisoned.
Sure, but what you're underestimating is that within Russia's... But here's what you're underestimating. Within Russia's managed democracy, there is a huge range of disagreement. There are many pro-Western liberals in Putin's...
It's a managed democracy.
Hold on. In Putin's own party, the United Russia Party, huge faction. There's a huge faction of westernized liberals. The Russian quote-unquote oligarchy, the rich in Russia, very pro-Western, very liberal. So within this managed democracy, there's a lot of range of disagreement. Now, the Navalnys, who want to do illegal things,
such as,
according to Russian law, incendiary protests and get people on the street and the color revolution stuff, they don't have any tolerance for that.
That's just called protesting. That's just called expressing the freedom of speech.
Okay, well, whatever. Every country has red lines of sovereignty. There are pro-Western liberals in Putin's own party. Within Putin's managed democracy, you will find people, you will find anything from pro-Western liberals, pragmatic technocrats, monarchistic nationalists, far-right people, all the way up to communists, straight up capital C communists of the Soviet era. So you find you find a whole range of political differences just within Russia's managed democracy.
I don't know a whole lot about their elections, but I know that there's rampant evidence of fraud. So I'm not even sure I would call it a managed democracy. I just call it a facade of a democracy.
No.
I mean, yeah, massive censorship, people just getting fucking assassinated. You don't. I thought you want that.
Listen, you clearly don't understand anything about Russia.
I mean, yeah, I don't know like all the.
If
all
you
these,
think,
like, specifics.
no, let me tell you, the U.S. I'm about to report on this now, has equal, if not more, than Russia, functionally speaking.
Then what?
Through big tech and through the U.S. media monopoly. When is the last time you go to an average person's house? Do they have RT on their cable box? Probably not. And if they do, it's like channel 562. There's not a lot of very listen. U.S. Listen, there's not. Dude. Let me tell you something. I'm literally covering a case now of 4 Americans who are arrested by the FBI. And they're going to be charged as so-called foreign agents because they express opposition to the U.S. government and express pro-Russian views. I can give you another example of, what is his name? Douglas something. 10 years in prison for a meme he posted in relation to the 2016 election.
Oh, I heard about that.
Yeah. I can give you
What?
other kinds of, shady shit that they do, which we count that in Russia. But when Russia does shady shit, we just go, the government's repressing them. It's a kangaroo court. It's a bullshit, right? When Alex Jones goes to court and they tell him you have to pay $1.2 billion.
Hold on. Wait. Do you think that Alex Jones, like...
Hold on.
Do you think that... Like,
We can't talk about it.
Okay.
Can't talk about the details of that case. But I'm telling you, it's not $1.2 billion. That's a clear
Well, yeah,
case.
he's obviously not actually going to pay that amount.
I know he's not, but I'm telling you, it's a way to censor and silence him in a way beyond what they've already done, which is deplatform him. Look, functionally speaking, I will be crazy and say the U.S. has more censorship. You know, I don't know why, because it's just that in Russia, it's way easier to find anti-government opinions on the internet and on most of the forms of media people use.
I mean,
easier.
from what I've heard, they have like this agency that's just like dedicated to internet censorship. And dude, I think if you existed in Russia or China, like I don't know if they would want to like. I don't know if they would like your opinions too much. Let's just say that without getting into anything more.
Okay, so I know Russian communists, not just ones of the KPRF, bunch of others. I know the situation on Russian media, social media. It's not what you're saying. There's no way they have an agency big enough to account for all the debates and shit that go on. I mean, you have no idea what's going on in Russia if you think that.
I'll have to look it up. But I think they have ways they have algorithms, and I mean if a post gets too popular, I mean it's the internet restriction bill. I mean I know that they blocked all the Western shit, so now they're all downloading VPNs.
No, the West blocked Russia.
European. So the European in some European countries they blocked RT, but it's not even not YouTube labels it. It's not, but none of it's banned in the U.S. And I think for example, if there was people,
it is banned in the U.S.
What? So RT.com.
All right, listen, we're gonna have to wrap this up soon, but here's what I'll tell you.
You got a Betty Vi?
Here's what I'll tell you. RT America straight up got banned. They got their whole media license
right
revoked.
now, dude. I'm on their website right now.
RT America, not RT.
Where'd they get banned from?
They got shut down. Let me tell you something.
No, they voluntarily shut down.
No, they didn't. They got shut down by the government. Elon Musk, the Twitter files. The U.S. government collaborates with big tech. It's big tech that's doing all the censorship.
Let me stop you right there. Twitter took action on 37. So basically, what happened is the government they made some requests to take some people down. If you actually look into it, but then occasionally what they would do, they would take it down, but only about 37% or 40% of the time they would actually do it. And apparently,
dude, okay, so half the time they do it. Wow, that's not a lot.
Their transparency reports, they said that they do stuff with the government.
No, the Twitter file. No, you're lying. You're lying. The Twitter files clearly revealed ways in which the U.S. government was collaborating with Twitter that were not being disclosed to the public until Elon Musk got in there and blew the whistle on it. So you're wrong about that.
Okay, but yeah,
totally wrong about that.
They did not take action on a lot of things. It was basically just they.
Wow, even if I believed you and it was only 40%, that's not only 40%. That's a fuck ton. All right, listen. Big tech censorship is a form of U.S. government censorship. It's not just the private sector, because there's collaboration and there's infiltration by the government into big tech. Everyone knows that. You'd be a fool not to believe it.
Do you realize there might be an incentive to not want to have just crazy people running around or
hey!
sorry like
Listen.
Nazis like running around on
All right.
Twitter and making your platform look bad, so then you lose money. Advertisers leave your platform. Don't you think that would like kind of make your website look bad?
Yeah,
as
but the
kinda,
U.S. government wasn't
Like-
targeting Nazis.
like,
They were targeting people critical of the foreign policy in general.
the FBI goes after Nazis all the time, bro.
Yeah, but the FBI, because half the Nazis they go after are themselves FBI agents. We all know how this shit works. Anyone who's into any...
Anti-fascist action, bro.
Yeah, the FBI creates Nazi extremism and then claps itself on the back by going after it. Yes, they do.
Yeah,
the FBI, I would call that at a 95% rate. Every time there's any violent ideological extremism, it's because of FBI infiltration.
Bro, you sound like a Nazi right now. Like, dude, like I've talked to Nazis before, and like,
All right,
they're
you
like,
know
oh
what?
yeah.
This guy's an idiot. You're clearly you don't take this to you sound like a Nazi now. You just
Okay, all right.
You lost any and all possible credibility for this whole thing.
I'm saying that
and get the fuck out of here. All right. And now Jackson's calling me.